Nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo. La pace sia con voi.
Holy Father, allow me in my capacity as Dean of the Diplomatic Corps accredited to the Holy See to extend to you our most sincere greetings and our heartfelt best wishes for the new year that has just begun. I renew our gratitude for this important moment of closeness, an encounter that bears witness to the friendship between the Holy See and our diplomatic missions, united by the shared aim of pursuing peace among peoples and nations. With deep emotion, permit me on this occasion to remember your beloved predecessor, Pope Francis. It was precisely last January in this very place that he welcomed us and affectionately invited us to become messengers throughout the world of hope, which was at the very foundation of the Jubilee that just concluded. Holy Father, in recalling the months that have passed, it is fitting to evoke the whirlwind of emotions that each of us experienced. From the news of the passing of Pope Bergoglio during the Easter celebrations to your elections to the See of Peter. We first felt sorrow and disbelief at the death of a shepherd who bore witness to love for his flock until his final moment. Then the emptiness of the days of mourning. Finally came the joy of the white smoke and the pealing bells throughout the eternal city, which transformed waiting into a hopeful anticipation for the new Vicar of Christ. I remember that afternoon, people rushing towards the Vatican in Via della Conciliazione, filling rapidly and joyfully with men and women from all over the world, present as witnesses to history at the moment when the new Pope will appear from the loggia of St. Peter's Basilica. I recall the applause and the happiness of the crowd upon hearing your name proclaimed for the first time as Supreme Pontiff Leo XIV. I was then struck, Your Holiness, by the attentive silence with which your inaugural address was received. In this time of great uncertainty and fear, your words immediately warmed the millions of hearts, offering a message of calm to the anxieties of so many. Peace be with you. It is the peace of the risen Christ, a peace that is unarmed and disarming, humble and persevering. I thank you, Holy Father, for having shown us by these words, later taken up in your message for the World Day of Peace on January 1st, the path that every man and woman is called to walk. In them resounds the serene yet powerful hope of a reconciled world. Here lies the profound meaning of the diplomatic mission, to resolve conflicts through the strength of reason and constant determination to work for the common good. Permit me also, Your Holiness, to recall your first apostolic journey to Turkey and Lebanon, which was rich in moments already etched in the collective imagination. In Turkey, on the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea, the journey towards Christian unity experienced a historic milestone in your prayerful recollection with the Patriarch of Constantinople. Your words spoken in his ancient Nicaea still resonate. Today, the whole of humanity afflicted by violence and conflict is crying out for reconciliation. In the land of the Cedars, on the shores of a wounded Mediterranean, you recall the celebrated words of St. John Paul II. Lebanon is more than a country, it is a message. And encouraged us to disarm our hearts so that peace and justice might prevail. Through your inspired magisterial and pastoral action, you, Holy Father, reminded the entire world that silence in the face of wars is not neutrality, but complicity, forcefully denouncing the false truth of slogans that portray the reckless arms race as a necessity for security, while populations suffer and the abyss draws nearer. Holy Father, we cannot but turn our gaze to the Jubilee of 2025, concluded only a few days ago, which profoundly touched the hearts of countless people. Under your guidance, the Holy Year proved to be an opportunity for genuine renewal, which you translated into gestures of authentic closeness from the very beginning of your Petrine ministry. We recall with esteem your various interventions, such as last September on the occasion of the World Meeting of Human Fraternity, then recalling Pope Francis' encyclical Fratelli Tutti. You invited participants to identify local and international ways of developing new forms of social charity and to nurture the spirituality of fraternity through culture, working relationship, and diplomatic action. In this spirit, commitment was renewed, for example, to the humanitarian corridors for peace, vigorously supported in the months following your election, a model of welcome that you have indicated as a possible and dignified alternative to the culture of indifference. Thanks also to these initiatives of fraternity, the Holy Door ideally remains open through paths of assistance that have restored hope to many refugees, bearing witness that solidarity, when organized and sustained, constitutes the most solid foundation of diplomacy. Your Holiness, in the name you have chosen, there is a powerful reference to the challenges that Leo XIII once faced, different in content, yet similar in substance. In this new age of machines, today, digital and linked to artificial intelligence, the risk that calculation may overstep ethical boundaries is great. There is an urgent need to regulate technological development on a human scale. As you have repeatedly reminded us, artificial intelligence must not replace the human being, but remain at his or her service, reaffirming that data and creativity are not enough without an ethical orientation towards the integral development of the human person. It is precisely with our gaze fixed on the centrality of human person that I wish to express the condolences and closeness of the diplomatic corps to the young lives lost and injured and their families affected by the tragic accident that occurred in Crans-Montana, Switzerland. We pray for them and for the Venezuelan people, recalling your words that the good of the beloved Venezuelan people must prevail over every other consideration. This must lead to the overcoming of violence and to the pursuit of paths and justice of peace. Holy Father, I conclude with the hope that your actions may bear for all humanity the same fruitfulness that the thought of your spiritual father, St. Augustine, bore for the Church. Just as he was able to unite the wisdom of his time with the Christian creed, may you help the world to find true peace, integrating the countless human experiences with a universal message of fraternity capable of speaking to the heart of every man and woman on the planet. Your Holiness, with profound esteem and affection on behalf of the diplomatic corps, I extend to you our warmest best wishes for the new year, renewing the offer of our service in favor of peace and the building of bonds that may help resolve the conflicts of the world. Thank you.
Your Eminence, Your Excellencies, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank His Excellency, Ambassador George Poulide, Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, for his kind and respectful words on your behalf. I welcome all of you to this meeting for the exchange of greetings at the beginning of the new year. This is a traditional occasion in the life of the Diplomatic Corps accredited to the Holy See, but it is a new experience for me since it was only several months ago that I was called to shepherd Christ's flock. I am pleased, therefore, to welcome you this morning, and I am grateful for your generous participation, which this year is enriched by the presence of the new resident heads of mission of Kazakhstan, Burundi, and Belarus. I thank the respective governmental authorities for their decision to open in Rome diplomatic representations to the Holy See. This is a tangible sign of good and fruitful bilateral relations. To each of you, dear ambassadors, I wish to extend my good wishes to your countries and to share a reflection on our times, which are so troubled by a growing number of tensions and conflicts. This past year saw many significant events, beginning with those directly affecting the life of the Church, which experienced a profound jubilee and saw the return to the Father's house of my venerable predecessor, Pope Francis. The whole world gathered around his coffin on the day of his funeral and sensed the loss of a father who had guided the people of God with immense pastoral charity. A few days ago, we closed the last holy door, that of St. Peter's Basilica, which Pope Francis himself had opened on Christmas night in 2024. During the Holy Year, millions of pilgrims flocked to Rome to make their Jubilee pilgrimage. Each person brought his or her own experiences, questions, and joys, as well as pains and wounds, to pass through the holy doors, which are symbols of Christ himself, our heavenly physician. By coming in the flesh, he took upon himself our humanity in order to make us partakers of his divine life, as we contemplated in the recent celebration of Christmas. I am confident that through these experiences, many people have been able to deepen or rediscover their relationship with the Lord Jesus, finding comfort and renewed hope for facing life's challenges. In questa sede desidero esprimere particolare gratitudine ai romani che con grande pazienza e senso di ospitalità si sono fatti carico dei numerosi pellegrini e turisti giunti in urbe da ogni parte del mondo. Uno speciale apprezzamento desidero rivolgere al governo italiano, all'amministrazione capitolina e alle forze dell'ordine che si sono adoperate con zelo e precisione perché Roma fosse in grado di accogliere tutti i visitatori e gli eventi giubilari e quelli successivi alla morte di Papa Francesco potessero svolgersi in serenità e sicurezza. La Santa Sede e l'Italia condividono non solo la vicinanza geografica, ma soprattutto la lunga storia di fede e di cultura che lega la Chiesa a questa splendida penisola e al suo popolo. Ne sono un segno anche le eccellenti relazioni bilaterali, suggellate quest'anno dall'entrata in vigore delle modifiche all'accordo sull'assistenza spirituale delle forze armate, che consentirà una maggiore efficacia nell'accompagnamento spirituale delle donne e degli uomini che prestano il loro servizio nelle forze armate in Italia e nelle numerose missioni all'estero, come pure la firma dell'accordo per un impianto agrivoltaico a Santa Maria di Galeria, che consentirà la fornitura di energia elettrica alla città del Vaticano tramite il ricorso a fonti rinnovabili, confermando così il comune impegno in favore del creato. Sono poi grato per le visite che mi hanno reso le alte cariche dello Stato all'inizio del mio pontificato e per la squisita ospitalità riservatami al Palazzo del Quirinale dal Signor Presidente della Repubblica, al quale desidero far giungere il mio cordiale e riconoscente saluto. During the past year, having accepted the invitation given to Pope Francis, I had the joy of visiting Turkey and Lebanon. I am grateful to the authorities of both countries for their welcome. In Iznik, Turkey, together with the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople and representatives of other Christian denominations, I commemorated the 1700th anniversary of the First Ecumenical Council. This was an important opportunity for renewing our commitment to the journey towards the full, visible unity of all Christians. In Lebanon, I met a people who, despite their difficulties, are full of faith and enthusiasm. There I sensed the hope of young people who aspire to build a more just and cohesive society and to strengthen the bond of cultures and religions that makes the land of the cedars unique in the world. Dear ambassadors, prompted by the tragic events of the sack of Rome in 410 AD, St. Augustine wrote De Civitate Dei, the city of God. This is one of the most powerful of his theological, philosophical, and literary works. As Pope Benedict XVI observed, it is an impressive work crucial to the development of Western political thought and the Christian theology of history. It draws, as we would say in contemporary terms, on a narrative that was spreading for the pagans, still numerous at that time, and even quite a few Christians thought that the God of the new religion and the apostles themselves had shown themselves incapable of protecting the city. In the days of the pagan gods, Rome was caput mundi, the great capital, and no one could have imagined that it would fall into the hands of its enemies. Now, with the God of the Christians, this great city no longer seemed secure. Certainly, our times are very distant from those events. This is not simply a question of temporal distance, but also of a different cultural awareness and the development of categories of thought. However, we cannot overlook the fact that our own cultural sensibilities have drawn nourishment from that work, which, like all the classics, speaks to people of every generation. Augustine interprets events in history itself according to the model of two cities. First, there's the city of God, which is eternal and characterized by God's unconditional love, amor Dei, as well as love for one's neighbor, especially the poor. Then there is the earthly city, which is a temporary dwelling place where human beings live until death. In our day, the latter includes all social and political institutions, from the family to the nation-state and international organizations. For Augustine, this city was epitomized by the Roman Empire. Indeed, the earthly city is centered on pride and self-love, amor sui, and the thirst for worldly power and glory that leads to destruction. However, this is not a reading of history that seeks to contrast eternity with the present, the church with the state, nor is it a dialectic about the role of religion within civil society. In Augustine's view, the two cities coexist until the end of time. Each has both an external and an internal dimension, for they are to be understood not only in light of the external manner in which they are constructed throughout history, but also through the lens of the internal attitudes of each human being towards the realities of life and historical events. In this perspective, each of us is a protagonist and thus responsible for history. Moreover, Augustine emphasizes that Christians are called by God to dwell in the earthly city with their hearts and minds turned towards the heavenly city, their true homeland. At the same time, Christians living in the earthly city are not strangers to the political world, and guided by the scriptures, seek to apply Christian ethics to civil government. The City of God does not propose a political program. Instead, it offers valuable reflections on fundamental issues concerning social and political life, such as the search for a more just and peaceful coexistence among peoples. Augustine also warns of the grave dangers to political life arising from false representations of history, excessive nationalism, and the distortion of the ideal of the political leader. Although the context in which we live today is different from that of the 5th century, some similarities remain highly relevant. We are now, as then, in an era of widespread migratory movements. As then, we are living at a time of a profound readjustment of geopolitical balances and cultural paradigms. As then, we are, in Pope Francis' well-known expression, not in an era of change, but in a change of era. In our time, the weakness of multilateralism is a particular cause for concern at the international level. A diplomacy that promotes dialogue and seeks consensus among all parties is being replaced by a diplomacy based on force by either individuals or groups of allies. War is back in vogue, and a zeal for war is spreading. The principle established after the Second World War, which prohibited nations from using force to violate the borders of others, has been completely undermined. Peace is no longer sought as a gift and a desirable good in itself, or in the pursuit of the establishment of the ordered universe willed by God, with a more perfect form of justice among men and women. Instead, peace is sought through weapons as a condition for asserting one's own dominion. This gravely threatens the rule of law, which is the foundation of all peaceful civil coexistence. Furthermore, St. Augustine notes, there is no one who does not wish to have peace. For even those who make war desire nothing but victory. They desire, that is to say, to attain peace with glory. For what else is victory than the conquest of those who resist us? And when this is done, there is peace. For even those who intentionally interrupt the peace in which they are living have no hatred of peace, but only wish it changed into a peace that suits them better. They do not therefore wish to have no peace, but only the peace that they desire. It was precisely this attitude that led humanity into the tragedy of the Second World War. From those ashes, the United Nations was born, whose 80th anniversary was recently celebrated. The UN was established by the determination of 51 nations as the center of multilateral cooperation in order to prevent future global catastrophes, for safeguarding peace, defending fundamental human rights, and promoting sustainable development. I'd like to draw particular attention to the importance of international humanitarian law. Compliance with this cannot depend on mere circumstances and military or strategic interests. Humanitarian law, in addition to guaranteeing a minimum of humanity during the ravages of war, is a commitment that states have made. Such law must always prevail over the ambitions of belligerents in order to mitigate the devastating effects of war, also with a view to reconstruction. We cannot ignore that the destruction of hospitals, energy infrastructure, homes, and places essential to daily life constitutes a serious violation of international humanitarian law. The Holy See firmly reiterates its condemnation of any form of involvement of civilians in military operations. It likewise hopes that the international community will remember that the protection of the principle of the inviolability of human dignity and the sanctity of life always counts for more than any mere national interest. With this in mind, the United Nations has mediated conflicts, promoted development, and helped states protect human rights and fundamental freedoms. In a world facing complex challenges such as geopolitical tensions, inequalities, and climate crises, the UN should play a key role in fostering dialogue and humanitarian support, helping to build a more just future. Efforts are therefore needed to ensure that the United Nations not only reflects the situation of today's world rather than that of the post-war period, but that it is also more focused and efficient in pursuing policies aimed at the unity of the human family instead of ideologies. The purpose of multilateralism, then, is to provide a place where people can meet and talk, modeled on the ancient Roman Forum or the medieval square. At the same time, in order to engage in dialogue, there needs to be agreement on the words and concepts that are used. Rediscovering the meaning of words is perhaps one of the primary challenges of our time. When words lose their connection to reality, and reality itself becomes debatable and ultimately incommunicable, we become like the two people to whom St. Augustine refers, who are forced to stay together without either of them knowing the other's language. He observes that, I quote, "Dumb animals, even those of different species, understand each other more easily than these two individuals. For even though they are both human beings, their common nature is no help to friendliness when they are prevented by diversity of language from conveying their sentiments to one another, so that a man would more readily converse with his dog than with a foreigner." End of quote. Today, the meaning of words is ever more fluid, and the concepts they represent are increasingly ambiguous. Language is no longer the preferred means by which human beings come to know and encounter one another. Moreover, in the contortions of semantic ambiguity, language is becoming more and more a weapon with which to deceive or to strike and offend opponents. We need words once again to express distinct and clear realities unequivocally. Only in this way can authentic dialogue resume without misunderstandings. This should happen in our homes and public spaces, in politics, in the media, and on social media. It should likewise occur in the context of international relations and multilateralism, so that the latter can regain the strength needed for undertaking its role of encounter and mediation. This is indeed necessary for preventing conflicts and for ensuring that no one is tempted to prevail over others with a mindset of force, whether verbal, physical, or military. We should also note the paradox that this weakening of language is often invoked in the name of freedom of expression itself. However, on closer inspection, the opposite is true, for freedom of speech and expression is guaranteed precisely by the certainty of language and the fact that every term is anchored in the truth. It is painful to see how, especially in the West, the space for genuine freedom of expression is rapidly shrinking. At the same time, a new Orwellian-style language is developing, which, in an attempt to be increasingly inclusive, ends up excluding those who do not conform to the ideologies that are fueling it. Unfortunately, this leads to other consequences that end up restricting fundamental human rights, starting with the freedom of conscience. In this regard, conscientious objection allows individuals to refuse legal or professional obligations that conflict with moral, ethical, or religious principles deeply rooted in their personal lives. This may be the refusal of military service in the name of nonviolence, or the refusal on the part of doctors and healthcare professionals to engage in practices such as abortion or euthanasia. Conscientious objection is not rebellion, but an act of fidelity to oneself. At this moment in history, freedom of conscience seems increasingly to be questioned by states, even those that claim to be based on democracy and human rights. This freedom, however, establishes a balance between the collective interest and individual dignity. It also emphasizes that a truly free society does not impose uniformity, but protects the diversity of consciences, preventing authoritarian tendencies and promoting an ethical dialogue that enriches the social fabric. In a similar way, religious freedom risks being curtailed. As Benedict XVI recalled, This is the first of all human rights because it expresses the most fundamental reality of the person. The most recent data shows that violations of religious freedom are on the rise, and that 64% of the world's population suffers serious violations of this right. In requesting that the religious freedom and worship of Christians be fully respected, the Holy See asks the same for all other religious communities. On the 60th anniversary of the promulgation of the Declaration Nostra Aetate, one of the fruits of the Second Vatican Ecumenical Council that concluded on December 8, 1965, I had the opportunity to reiterate the categorical rejection of all forms of anti-Semitism, which unfortunately continues to sow hatred and death. I likewise emphasize the importance of cultivating the Jewish-Christian dialogue, deepening our common biblical roots. On that same commemorative occasion, the meeting with representatives of other religions allowed me to renew my appreciation for the progress made in recent decades along the path of interreligious dialogue. Indeed, in every sincere religious quest, there is a reflection of the one divine mystery that embraces all creation. In this regard, I ask all the nations to guarantee full freedom of religion and worship to each of their citizens. However, it cannot be overlooked that the persecution of Christians remains one of the most widespread human rights crises today, affecting over 380 million believers worldwide. They suffer high or extreme levels of discrimination, violence, and oppression because of their faith. This phenomenon impinges on approximately 1 in 7 Christians globally, and it worsened in 2025 due to ongoing conflicts, authoritarian regimes, and religious extremism. Sadly, all of this demonstrates that religious freedom is considered in many contexts more as a privilege or concession than a fundamental human right. Here I would especially call to mind the many victims of violence, including religiously motivated violence in Bangladesh, in the Sahel region, and in Nigeria, as well as those of the serious terrorist attack last June on the parish of St. Elias in Damascus. Nor do I forget the victims of jihadist violence in Cabo Delgado, Mozambique. At the same time, we must not forget a subtle form of religious discrimination against Christians, which is spreading even in countries where they are in the majority, such as in Europe or the Americas. There, they are sometimes restricted in their ability to proclaim the truths of the gospel for political or ideological reasons, especially when they defend the dignity of the weakest, the unborn, refugees and migrants, or promote the family. In its international relations and actions, the Holy See consistently takes a stand in defense of the inalienable dignity of every person. It cannot be overlooked, for example, that every migrant is a person and as such has inalienable rights that must be respected in every situation. Not all migrants move by choice, but many are forced to flee because of violence, persecution, conflict, and even the effects of climate change, as in various parts of Africa and Asia. In this year, which also marks the 75th anniversary of the International Organization for Migration, I renew the Holy See's hope that the actions taken by states against criminality and human trafficking will not become a pretext for undermining the dignity of migrants and refugees. The same considerations apply to prisoners who can never be reduced to the crimes they have committed. On this occasion, I wish to express my heartfelt gratitude to the governments that have responded positively to my venerable predecessor's appeal for gestures of clemency during the Jubilee year. It is my hope that the spirit of the Jubilee will permanently and structurally inspire the administration of justice so that penalties are proportionate to the crimes committed, dignified conditions are guaranteed for prisoners, and above all, efforts are made to abolish the death penalty, a measure that destroys all hope of forgiveness and renewal. Nor can we forget the suffering of so many prisoners held for political reasons in many countries. Furthermore, from a Christian perspective, human beings are created in the image and likeness of God, who, by calling them into existence out of love, has at the same time called them to love. This vocation is revealed in a privileged and unique way within the family. It is in this context that we learn to love and foster the capacity to serve life, thus contributing to the development of society and the Church's mission. Despite its centrality, the institution of the family faces two crucial challenges today. On the one hand, there is a worrying tendency in the international system to neglect and underestimate its fundamental social role, leading to its progressive institutional marginalization. On the other hand, we cannot ignore the growing and painful reality of fragile, broken, and suffering families afflicted by internal difficulties and disturbing phenomena, including domestic violence. The vocation to love and to life, which manifests itself in an important way in the exclusive and indissoluble union between a woman and a man, implies a fundamental ethical imperative for enabling families to welcome and fully care for unborn life. This is increasingly a priority, especially in those countries that are experiencing a dramatic decline in birth rates. Life, in fact, is a priceless gift that develops within a committed relationship based on mutual self-giving and service. In light of this profound vision of life as a gift to be cherished, and of the family as its responsible guardian, we categorically reject any practice that denies or exploits the origin of life and its development. Among these is abortion, which cuts short a growing life and refuses to welcome the gift of life. In this regard, the Holy See expresses deep concern about projects aimed at financing cross-border mobility for the purpose of accessing the so-called right to safe abortion. It also considers it deplorable that public resources are allocated to suppress life rather than being invested to support mothers and families. The primary objective must remain the protection of every unborn child and the effective and concrete support of every woman so that she is able to welcome life. Likewise, there's the practice of surrogacy. By transforming gestation into a negotiable service, this violates the dignity both of the child, who is reduced to a product, and of the mother, exploiting her body and the generative process and distorting the original relational calling of the family. Similar considerations can be extended to the sick, to those who are elderly or isolated, who at times struggle to find a reason to continue living. Civil society and states also have a responsibility to respond concretely to situations of vulnerability, offering solutions to human suffering such as palliative care, and promoting policies of authentic solidarity rather than encouraging deceptive forms of compassion such as euthanasia. A comparable reflection can be made concerning the many young people who are forced to confront numerous hardships, including drug addiction. In order to prevent millions of young people around the world from falling victim to substance abuse, concerted efforts are required to eradicate this scourge upon humanity and the drug trafficking that fuels it. Together with these efforts, there must be adequate policies for recovery from addiction, as well as greater investment in human development, education, and the creation of employment opportunities. In light of these challenges, we firmly reiterate that the protection of the right to life constitutes the indispensable foundation of every other human right. A society is healthy and truly progresses only when it safeguards the sanctity of human life and works actively to promote it. The aforementioned considerations lead me to believe that in the current context, we are seeing an actual short circuit of human rights. The right to freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, religious freedom, and even the right to life are being restricted in the name of other so-called new rights, with the result that the very framework of human rights is losing its vitality and creating space for force and oppression. This occurs when each right becomes self-referential, and especially when it becomes disconnected from reality, nature, and truth. Distinguished ambassadors, while St. Augustine highlights the coexistence of the heavenly and earthly cities until the end of time, our era seems somewhat inclined to deny the city of God its right of citizenship. It seems that only the earthly city exists, enclosed exclusively within its borders. Seeking only imminent goods undermines that tranquility of order, which for Augustine constitutes the very essence of peace, which concerns society and nations as much as the human soul itself, and is essential for any civil coexistence. In the absence of a transcendent and objective foundation, only self-love prevails, to the point of indifference to God, who governs the earthly city. Yet, as Augustine notes, great is the folly of pride in those individuals who think that the supreme good can be found in this life, and that they can become happy by their own resources. Pride obscures both reality itself and our empathy toward others. It is no coincidence that pride is always at the root of every conflict. Consequently, as I recalled in my message for the World Day of Peace, we lose our sense of realism and surrender to a partial and distorted view of the world, disfigured by darkness and fear, thus paving the way for the mentality of confrontation, which is the precursor to every war. We see this in many contexts, starting with the ongoing war in Ukraine and the suffering inflicted on the civilian population. Faced with this tragic situation, the Holy See strongly reiterates the pressing need for an immediate ceasefire and for dialogue motivated by a sincere search for ways leading to peace. I make an urgent appeal to the international community not to waver in its commitment to pursuing just and lasting solutions that will protect the most vulnerable and restore hope to the afflicted peoples. I likewise emphasize the Holy See's full willingness to support any initiative that promotes peace and harmony. At the same time, we see this in the Holy Land, where, despite the truce announced in October, the civilian population continues to endure a serious humanitarian crisis, adding further suffering to that already experienced. The Holy See is especially attentive to any diplomatic initiative that seeks to guarantee to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip a future of lasting peace and justice in their own land, as well as to the entire Palestinian people and the entire Israeli people. In particular, the two-state solution remains the institutional perspective for meeting the legitimate aspirations for both peoples. Yet sadly, there has been an increase in violence in the West Bank against the Palestinian civilian population, which has the right to live in peace in its own land. The escalating tensions in the Caribbean Sea and along the American Pacific coast are also a cause for serious concern. I wish to repeat my urgent appeal that peaceful political solutions to the current situation should be sought, keeping in mind the common good of the peoples and not the defense of partisan interests. This pertains in particular to Venezuela in light of recent developments. In this regard, I renew my appeal to respect the will of the Venezuelan people and to safeguard the human and civil rights of all, ensuring a future of stability and concord. To this end, inspiration may be drawn from the example of two of its children who I had the joy of canonizing last October, José Gregorio Hernández and Sister Carmen Rendiles. May their witness inspire the building of a society founded on justice, truth, freedom, and fraternity, and thus enable the nation to rise from the grave crisis that has afflicted it for so many years. Other crises are scattered across the global landscape. First, I refer to the desperate situation in Haiti, marked by many forms of violence, from human trafficking to forced exile and kidnappings. In this regard, it is my hope that with the necessary and concrete support of the international community, the country will be able to take the necessary steps as soon as possible to restore democratic order, end violence, and achieve reconciliation and peace. Nor can we forget the situation that has affected the Great Lakes region of Africa for decades, plagued by violence that has claimed many victims. I encourage the parties involved to seek a definitive, just, and lasting solution that will put an end to a conflict that has lasted far too long. Similarly, I think of the situation in Sudan, which has been transformed into a vast battlefield, as well as the continuing political instability in South Sudan, the youngest country in the family of nations, which came into being following the referendum 15 years ago. We cannot fail to mention the intensifying signs of tension in East Asia and to express hope that all parties involved will adopt a peaceful and dialogue-based approach to the contentious issues that are a source of potential conflict. My thoughts turn in particular to the grave humanitarian and security crisis afflicting Myanmar, which was further aggravated by the devastating earthquake last March. With renewed intensity, I make an appeal that paths of peace and inclusive dialogue be courageously chosen so as to guarantee everyone fair and timely access to humanitarian aid. To be authentic, democratic processes must be accompanied by the political will to pursue the common good, to strengthen social cohesion, and to promote the integral development of every person. At the heart of many of the situations I've mentioned, we can see something that Augustine himself pointed out, namely the persistent idea that peace is only possible through the use of force and deterrence. While war is content with destruction, peace requires continuous and patient efforts of construction as well as constant vigilance. Such efforts are required of everyone, starting with the countries that possess nuclear arsenals. I think in particular of the important need to follow up on the New START treaty, which expires in February. Indeed, there's a danger of returning to the race of producing ever more sophisticated new weapons, also by means of artificial intelligence. The latter is a tool that requires appropriate and ethical management, together with regulatory frameworks focused on the protection of freedom and human responsibility. Dear ambassadors, notwithstanding the tragic situation before our eyes, peace remains a difficult yet realistic good. As Augustine reminds us, peace is the aim of our good, because it is the very aim of the city of God, to which we aspire, even unconsciously, and of which we can enjoy a foretaste even in the earthly city. During our pilgrimage on this earth, peacemaking requires humility and courage. The humility to live truthfully and the courage to forgive. In the Christian life, we see these virtues reflected at Christmas, when truth, the eternal Word of God, becomes humble flesh. And at Easter, when the condemned righteous one forgives his persecutors and grants them his life as the risen one. Moreover, if we look more closely, there is no shortage of signs of courageous hope in our time, and we must constantly support them. I think, for example, of the Dayton Accords, which 30 years ago put an end to the blood-stained war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Despite difficulties and tensions, they opened up the possibility of a more prosperous and harmonious future. I think, too, of the joint declaration of peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, signed last August. We hope this will pave the way for a just and lasting peace in the South Caucasus and resolve the outstanding issues to the satisfaction of both parties. I likewise call to mind the efforts made in recent years by the Vietnamese authorities to improve relations with the Holy See and the conditions in which the Church functions in the country. These are all seeds of peace that need to be cultivated. This coming October will mark the 8th century of the death of St. Francis of Assisi, a man of peace and dialogue, universally recognized even by those who do not belong to the Catholic Church. His life shines brightly, for it was inspired by the courage to live in truth and the knowledge that a peaceful world is built starting with humble hearts turned towards the heavenly city. A humble and peace-loving heart is what I wish for each of us and for all who dwell in our countries at the beginning of this new year. Thank you.
Eccellenze, gentili signori, si invitano cortesemente i capi missioni, accompagnati dai rispettivi consorti, a dirigersi verso l'incontro col Santo Padre e i superiori della Segreteria di Stato per il saluto personale, seguendo le indicazioni fornite dal nostro personale addetto. Al termine del saluto, i capi missione sono pregati di recarsi senza i consorti presso la Cappella Sistina per la foto di gruppo. Si richiede agli altri membri dei seguiti diplomatici di rimanere nei posti loro assegnati. Excellencies, distinguished guests, the heads of missions accompanied by their respective spouses are kindly invited to proceed to the meeting with the Holy Father and the superiors of the Secretary of State for a personal greeting, following the directions provided by our staff. At the conclusion of the greeting, the heads of missions are requested to proceed without their spouses to the Sistine Chapel for the group photograph. All the other members of the diplomatic entourages are kindly asked to remain in their assigned seats. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, le chef de mission accompagné de leurs conjoints respectifs sont cordialement invités à se diriger vers la rencontre avec le Saint-Père et le supérieur de la Secrétariat d'État pour une salutation personnelle, en suivant les indications fournies par notre personnel. À l'issue de la salutation, les chefs de mission sont priés de se rendre sans leur conjoint à la chapelle Sixtine pour la photographie de groupe. Il est demandé à tous les autres membres de la délégation diplomatique de rester à les places assignées. Excelencias, señoras y señores, se invita cordialmente a los jefes de misión acompañados de sus respectivos cónyuges a dirigirse al encuentro con el Santo Padre y los superiores de la Secretaría de Estado para el saludo personal, siguiendo las indicaciones proporcionadas por nuestro personal. Al finalizar el saludo, se solicita a los jefes de misión que se dirijan, sin sus cónyuges, a la Capilla Sixtina para la fotografía grupal. Se pide a los demás miembros de las delegaciones diplomáticas que permanezcan en sus asientos asignados.